Ah, my friends, imagine, in the Jerusalem of centuries past, where war drums were beating in the Holy Land, that great city seemed to pulse with the rhythm of history. For Christians, Muslims, and Jews, this city was sacred in every cobblestone and every heartbeat. But the mighty armies, kings, and sultans of that era were drawn into battle not just for faith, but for power and glory as well. Today we'll dive into the stories behind the conquest of Jerusalem and the epic conflicts that unfolded on this land. In this relentless struggle that spanned centuries, swords glimmered in the air as dreams and hopes for victory clashed side by side. Those grand Crusader kingdoms with their stone castles and formidable armies never lost their desire to seize this land. Now we follow the trail of those powerful days, pursuing both the war and the great faiths that have echoed through history in this region. Sure, my friends. Let me take you back to the late 11th century, a time filled with echoes of calls from all across Europe, prayers ringing through the cobblestone streets, and hearts ignited with hope. The Crusades were born as one of the greatest military campaigns in history. But to understand those days, we first need to know the Europe filled with faith and desperation. Oh, those people were desperately searching for a way out of their misery. The idea of recapturing Jerusalem, the Holy Land for Christians, became a path that drew them in. That's when Pope Urban II delivered a speech in Clermont that, my friends, had such a profound impact that thousands of people hit the road. As Pope Urban II's call echoed in the church square, he raised his hands to the sky and said, God wills it. He was inviting the Christian world to unite and urge them to embark on a journey to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslims. A spark of hope ignited in the eyes of faithful people. Alone, the peasants living in misery, the minor nobles, all came together. They had no food or shelter, but they had a sacred purpose inside them. And my friends, armies, nobles, and princes from all corners of Europe responded to this call. Some set off toward Jerusalem hoping to earn a place in heaven, while others pursued fame and glory. But of course, this gathering wasn't just about faith. The power struggles among European nobles at the time and the troubles on the continent provided a backdrop for this call to resonate. Pope Urban II's appeal also offered a chance to unite the divided Christian community and reduce the civil wars in Europe. Now we see that this event was not merely a military campaign, but the beginning of a massive adventure shaped by ideals and ambitions. And so soldiers, nobles, and ordinary folks from all over Europe set out to fight for Jerusalem. This was not just a war, it was the story of those chasing hope and dreams. Now this epic journey begins, my friends. Visualize those days with me, feel the squares, the prayers, the calls to action. Now we are ready to witness the Crusaders' journey toward Jerusalem together. Ah, my friends. Let's all envision the long and arduous journey the Crusaders took to reach the Holy Land. This journey has been etched in history as a tale where the faith of thousands of hearts chasing a dream was put to the test. These people, young and old, rich and poor, set out from all corners of Europe to reach the Jerusalem of their dreams, embarking on such an adventure that they faced new challenges with every step. Picture this in your mind at first. These people were a crowd bursting with excitement and faith, but as the road stretched on, their backs bent under heavy loads, battling harsh natural conditions and the heat. Nights were cold and harsh, while days were spent under the scorching sun. Sometimes they crossed mountains, other times they struggled with thirst across barren lands. And those rivers, my friends, sometimes stood before them like a furious barrier. Those who fell into the water and got swept away. Each of them tells us just how tough this journey was. It wasn't just the power of nature that they faced. They encountered people from different lands, sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile. Along the way, they had to fight against armies trying to stop them and local kingdoms that didn't want to let them pass. Imagine these people, already grappling with hunger and thirst, now having to swing swords they diminished with every battle. Yet still, my friends, they had the sparkle of Jerusalem in their eyes. This sacred dream kept them going. And finally, as they approached Jerusalem, the bond among them grew stronger, despite all the obstacles in their way. This crowd, pushing forward while maintaining their faith, would be overflowing with pride when they finally arrived in Jerusalem. However, every step they took to set foot on this land was filled with struggle and hardship, teaching us what true determination and sacrifice really mean. My dear friends, we've reached the most challenging part of our journey. The walls of Antioch loomed like a massive barrier in front of us, standing as a real turning point for the Crusader army on their way to Jerusalem. This army, dreaming of Jerusalem, faced the majestic and imposing Antioch. This ancient city was so well preserved and fortified that, for many, suffering a defeat here could shatter their hopes of reaching Jerusalem. With this backdrop, the Crusader forces arrived at the walls of Antioch. However, the long and arduous journey had worn them down. Hunger and disease had deeply affected them. The army was struggling with hunger on one hand, while trying to fend off arrows raining down from the walls on the other. Throughout the months-long siege, despair often surrounded them. Some wanted to continue, while others were ready to give up. But what kept these people going was their love for Jerusalem. For them, this siege was a test. It was a threshold they had to cross on their path to Jerusalem. Friends, during the siege, the Crusader army began to seek miracles. It's said that at the moment hope seemed lost, a monk proclaimed he had found a holy spear. That moment, friends, sparked a fire in the entire army. With this spear, believed to be sacred, the army regained its morale and was filled with renewed determination to breach the walls of Antioch. And one night, under the stars, the gates of Antioch unexpectedly opened. With support from within, the Crusaders managed to overcome those massive walls. The victory at Antioch, my friends, was not just the conquest of a city for the Crusaders. It was one of their greatest triumphs on the road to Jerusalem. With the strength they gained here, they solidified their faith and continued on their path. Jerusalem was calling them, but thanks to this victory, they were now stronger and braver. And that night, as they shared stories of their triumph around the fire beneath the walls of Antioch, they were unaware that they had just written the first page of an even greater saga. The victory at Antioch heralded the great Crusader epic that would echo through history. My dear friends, we've finally reached the last and toughest stop of our journey, Jerusalem. After their victory in Antioch, the Crusaders, fueled by ambition, pressed on with faith in their hearts and finally arrived at the walls of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem was no place that could be conquered by just anyone passing through. Its ancient walls, rich with countless legends and historical significance, rose up like an invincible fortress. When the Crusader army set up camp outside Jerusalem, they faced numerous challenges. The soldiers were exhausted, and food and water were in short supply. The hot desert climate and thirst left them in dire straits, but their desire to reach Jerusalem helped them push through every hardship. The hope of reaching the sacred lands waiting for them behind those walls inspired the army and kept their spirits high. Everyone longed for the honor of conquering Jerusalem, their eyes set on the horizon, dreaming of the holy city. And at last, that great day arrived. The Crusaders began their siege of Jerusalem. But my friends, this siege was no easy task. The leaders, known for their strategic minds, discussed their attack plans around the city. The Crusaders decided to build siege towers to scale the walls. These towers were seen as the only way to breach the fortress. Trees were cut down all around for the construction, and wood was brought in from nearby villages. The siege lasted for days, and as the Crusaders got closer to the city walls, the clashes intensified. I can almost hear the sounds of those days. The crashing of catapults against the walls, the rising flames, the falling stones. The Crusaders tried to break into the city with their towers, but the soldiers inside fought to defend it with their lives. Blood, sweat, and tears mixed together. It felt like the very earth was raging. Finally, in July of 1099, the Crusaders broke down the gates of Jerusalem and stormed in. The struggle that ensued was filled with indescribable intensity and bloody conflict. Every street, every square turned into a battlefield. The screams echoing up to Jerusalem's stone walls were etched into history, my friends. The capture of Jerusalem was a victory for the Crusaders, but it is remembered as one of the bloodiest and most brutal conflicts in human history. When the city fell into their hands that day, they felt as if they had completed a sacred mission. Jerusalem was now theirs with this conquest. Their dreams of the holy city had become a reality. Ah, my dear friends, when the echoes of screams faded away from the walls of Jerusalem, the land still bore the scars of war. After capturing Jerusalem, the Crusaders decided to establish a holy kingdom here. But this kingdom had to be more than just a realm. It was meant to operate as a reflection of God on earth, a kind of temple. Thus, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was born out of the idea of creating a new form of governance in these ancient, sacred lands. The kingdom was shaped by a theocracy influenced by the Pope, with religious and military leaders governing together. Although there was a king at the forefront, the real authority in the Kingdom of Jerusalem lay with the clergy, and the most sacred representatives of Christianity were always at the center of the decision-making process. The Holy Sepulchre Church, the grandest structure in the city, became the very heart of the kingdom. This place symbolized the spiritual essence of the Crusader order established in Jerusalem, serving as both a gathering spot for pilgrims and the spiritual center of the kingdom. Ah, but the pillars of this kingdom were not solely religious. A military structure also played a significant role in its establishment. Jerusalem needed a strong defense against the surrounding Muslim states. The kingdom sought to secure itself by forming a tight military structure that included dedicated communities of knights, like the Knights Templar, who fought for religion. These military organizations, created to defend the Holy Lands, played a crucial role not only in safeguarding the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but also in protecting the Christian world. Knights were viewed as soldiers on the battlefield, protectors among the people, and holy missionaries in the eyes of the church. However, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was not just a military fortress. It had to ensure that the daily lives, trade, and worship of its inhabitants could continue. Therefore, Christian monasteries, churches, and schools providing religious education were established throughout the kingdom. The new government expected every individual living here to adhere to Christian teachings. The higher echelons of the kingdom were made up of nobles and clergy from Western Europe. The people lived according to the kingdom's rules, practiced their worship, and conducted their trade in accordance with the established order. Ah, the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This governance established in the Holy Lands had become a symbol of a new order of faith, not just a conquest. The sounds of bells echoed in the streets of the kingdom, services were held in the churches, and a sense of silence and power that embodied the spirit of that era was felt in every corner. And thus, this powerful governance began to assert its influence over the balance of the Middle East over time. My dear friends, the early days of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were like a newly sprouted tree taking root in the soil, growing stronger each day as its roots spread across this sacred land. Now let's think about one of the first rulers of this young kingdom, King Baudouin I. This brave leader played a crucial role in defending the kingdom and laying the foundations of justice and order, restoring the long-lost trust in Jerusalem. Ah, Baudouin, everyone knew him, a warrior and a wise ruler. He brought a vision to the kingdom that aimed not just at conquest, but at establishing a lasting order in these lands. When he set foot in Jerusalem, What he saw deeply affected him. The city lay in ruins, and the people lived in fear and poverty. To protect his kingdom and create a safe environment, Baudouin first made defensive arrangements, strengthening the castles surrounding the kingdom and reorganizing military units to safeguard the borders. Under his command, the Kingdom of Jerusalem became more resilient against its enemies. During Baudouin's reign, not only defense but also economic and social reforms gained significant importance. Just think about it, friends. This newly conquered land was filled with people from different nations and religions. Winning their trust and making Jerusalem a center of peace and justice was Baudouin's main goal. To revitalize trade in the city, he offered privileges to merchants coming from Europe and granted freedom of worship to communities of different faiths. This way, Jerusalem began to grow economically step by step. His tolerant approach won him the trust of both the Christians living in the city and the local population. Of course, the social structure of the Kingdom of Jerusalem also developed thanks to Baudouin. Certain regulations were put in place to ensure that people could find peace in their daily lives. Artisans were encouraged, roads were repaired, and cisterns and fountains were built. The atmosphere in the streets of Jerusalem was now different from before. As the prayers of worshippers rose to the heavens, merchants in the marketplaces were making deals, and artists were showcasing their works. Thanks to Baudouin's organizing touch, Jerusalem transformed into a hub of attraction, and with new settlers arriving after the Crusader armies, the population grew rapidly. The wave of order and security that Baudouin initiated left a legacy for the rulers who came after him. The strengthened Kingdom of Jerusalem under his leadership took root not just militarily, but also as a governing system and a way of life. The foundations he laid turned into a legacy that would ensure the Kingdom of Jerusalem stood strong for many years. Thus, Baudouin's shadow continued to live in the streets, churches, and markets of Jerusalem, and the mighty rise of the city during that period spread his name far and wide. Ah, my dear friends. Now close your eyes and think about the relationships between the Kingdom of Jerusalem and its Muslim neighbors during that time. Each border and city in those lands was like a delicately woven lace with every step. There was a different alliance, and at every corner, a tension ready to explode. Yes, the Crusaders who established the Kingdom of Jerusalem had to do more than just fight. They needed to forge new relationships to survive and put down roots in that region. The complex ties between the Crusader Kingdom in Jerusalem and the Muslim states were like a web woven with political cunning and the subtleties of diplomacy. Now think about this: the Crusaders had captured Jerusalem and brought those holy lands under their control. However, victory came with new responsibilities and dangers. Surrounding Jerusalem were the territories controlled by the Seljuks and Fatimids. This is where diplomacy came into play. For the Crusaders, it wasn't enough to simply fight their enemies with swords. They also had to learn to negotiate with neighboring states to stay safe. Baudouin's contacts with Muslim leaders, alongside the Crusader lords of Antioch and Tripoli, were vital for the survival of the Crusader kingdoms, especially with the Fatimid state, which was close to Jerusalem from the south. The Fatimids held significant power in the Muslim world. Their influence spread from their capital in Cairo all the way to Jerusalem. Therefore, making peace agreements with the Fatimids became a necessity for Baudouin and the other Crusader leaders. These agreements, which ensured mutual trade and provided security for merchants, allowed Jerusalem and the surrounding Crusader kingdoms to breathe economically, sustaining their cities with the wealth brought in by caravans. But my friends, this peace certainly didn't bring a stable tranquility. The relationships were always like a balancing scale. When both sides had interests at stake, conflicts often replaced peace agreements. Each side would try to defeat the other by forming alliances when necessary. There have even been temporary alliances with former great enemies, the Muslim lords and the Seljuks. These alliances were sometimes made to exploit internal conflicts among small emirates or to balance out feuding Muslim neighbors. The Crusaders were not only strengthening their defenses with these alliances, but were also on the lookout for opportunities to expand their areas of control. Of course, my friends, this wasn't just about political maneuvers. It also opened the door to a different kind of friendship brought about by trade. The Crusaders benefited from trading silk, spices, and precious stones that came from the East through their commercial relations with their Muslim neighbors. These trade connections became a crucial resource for sustaining the economy of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and increasing the welfare of its people. As merchants in Jerusalem bought and sold goods coming from Muslim lands, Muslim traders took advantage of the diversity in Jerusalem as well. This mutual dependency worked in favor of both sides in maintaining a certain balance despite political conflicts. However, every period of peace and every agreement wouldn't always be permanent. The deep differences between the two sides, religious beliefs, and conflicting interests always loomed like a shadow, suggesting that this peace would eventually be disrupted again. Indeed, the rising ambitions around the Kingdom of Jerusalem would shake all balances, leading towards another great war. Ah, my dear friends, this critical juncture in the pages of history was a time when events began to unfold that would upend the fate of the Crusader Kingdoms. The new order established in Jerusalem was maintained through complex alliances, power balances, and treaties, yet each passing day brought a strengthening will to seize the lands and completely uproot the Crusader kingdoms from these sacred territories. The symbol of this will was Zengi, a rising star in the Islamic world, spreading like a wildfire from Anatolia to Mesopotamia. Ah, friends, when we hear the name Zengi, the first thing that comes to mind is the conquest of Urfa. It was 1,144 Zengi captured Urfa, dealing the Crusaders their first major defeat and shattering the myth of their invincibility. The fall of Urfa was not just the loss of a city, it was a significant blow to the prestige of the Crusader world. It was as if they woke up one morning to face the bitter truth piercing their hearts. Zengi had struck a heavy blow to the security of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This defeat became the foundation for tales that European leaders would recount for centuries, leaving the populace, the church, and the nobility deeply shaken. This shock paved the way for the Second Crusade. Ah, the Second Crusade. This campaign started off much more organized and with far greater enthusiasm than the first. From the heart of Europe, echoing from France to Germany, not only the common folk but also kings and nobles joined this call. The most powerful kings of Europe, King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, took command of this new army gathered for Jerusalem. However, my friends, unfortunately, the Second Crusade fell victim to complex alliances, greed, and a lack of planning right from the preparation stage. The journey was harsh and merciless. The rugged mountains of Anatolia made it difficult for the soldiers and the common people to carry their burdens. Famine, disease, and attacks fragmented these armies coming from Europe. Zengi's allied Muslim emirs stood in the way of the Crusaders at every turn, seizing every moment of their weakness and despair as an opportunity. The army completed this challenging passage at a great cost. Finally, upon reaching Jerusalem, with the support of the Crusader leaders there, a plan was devised for an attack on Zengi's territories. However, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was divided within itself. Despite a large army being gathered, internal conflicts, differing priorities of the leaders, and clashes between alliances rendered them ineffective against Zengi. Chaos reigned, with each different leader and king prioritizing their own interests and lacking a united strategy. And Zengi watched all of this with great calm. He took advantage of every moment of tension among the Crusaders and began planning significant moves that would fundamentally shake their influence over the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Second Crusade became a campaign that the Crusaders embarked upon with hope, only to end in deep disappointment. Despite all the might coming from Europe, with large armies and ambitious leaders, Neither Urfa could be rescued, nor could Zengi's influence be broken. Dear friends, by the end of this campaign, the Crusaders faced not only a defeat but also a deeper reality. They had to acknowledge that the Muslim world was beginning to unite, and leaders like Zengi were working with great determination to bring the entire Islamic realm under one roof. The Second Crusade had come to an end, and the dark clouds over the Kingdom of Jerusalem had thickened. This was merely the beginning of Zengi's rise, for in the future, a great leader like Saladin would take up this struggle, reclaiming Jerusalem and sealing the fate of the Crusaders. Ah, dear friends, now I will take you to the beginning of the steps taken towards Jerusalem, the story of Saladin. At that time, the Islamic world was a region struggling with divisions rather than uniting. However, Saladin's rise was set to balance this chaos and write the first pages of a great story that would sow the seeds of unity in the Islamic world. Everything began when Saladin established the Ayyubid dynasty, paving the way for his struggle for Jerusalem. From a young age, Saladin was someone who impressed everyone around him with his courage, intelligence, and ability to inspire people. For him, war was not just a battlefield of clashing swords, it was also a fierce arena where beliefs and ideals fought. The loss of Jerusalem and the invasion by Crusader armies meant not just a loss of land, but also struck at the heart of the Islamic world. Saladin had made it his goal, his life mission, to reclaim these holy lands. Before long, with the support of his powerful Muslim uncle, Shirkuh, Saladin succeeded in breaking the power of the Fatimids in Egypt and establishing his rule. This victory not only highlighted Saladin as a military leader, but also as a statesman. However, controlling Egypt alone wasn't enough. The Islamic world was fragmented, dominated by rivalries rather than alliances among many principalities and emirates. Saladin dreamed of uniting this scattered power to create a unified Islamic army for the sake of Jerusalem. Even though Saladin was a great warrior, his true strength lay in his ability to persuade and bring people together. After the death of his uncle Shirkuh, he completely took control of Egypt and established the Ayyubid dynasty there. Egypt was now a powerful Islamic state reshaped under Saladin's leadership. His aim was not merely to increase his own power, rather, he felt responsible for uniting Muslims for the sake of Jerusalem. Saladin's call began to resonate among both the people and rulers over time. Many believed in his vision and did not ignore his call for unity. Throughout this process, Saladin patiently used diplomacy to persuade the Muslim emirates one by one. He drew them in with wise discussions about the importance of uniting against the Crusader threat. As unity was achieved in the Islamic world, hope for the conquest of Jerusalem began to flourish. Over time, Saladin became the absolute ruler of both Egypt and Damascus. Uniting these two great Islamic cities under a single banner was a rare achievement in history. Under Saladin's leadership, a deep bond was formed among these cities and their people. The unification of Muslims and the preparation of a great army started to attract the attention of even the Crusaders. This unity was a strengthening element for Saladin both on the battlefield and in the diplomatic arena. This great man was winning victories not only on the battlefield but also in people's hearts. As a brave commander, a clever strategist, and a unifying leader, he became a beacon of hope for Muslims. His call to action for Jerusalem was not just about gaining land, but was an invitation to unite people around a common belief. Saladin's goal was never solely about winning battles. He desired to bring peace and order to the Islamic world by uniting people toward the same purpose. So, dear friends, Saladin's march toward Jerusalem, each step taken to establish a unity among Muslims, is a great epic etched in the pages of history. His struggle and leadership will be passed down from generation to generation as an unforgettable story for humanity. Now we are gradually stepping toward the great battle where this unity and Saladin's desire to reclaim Jerusalem will deepen even further. Ah, dear friends, this was a battle like no other, where Jerusalem had never felt such a tremor before or since. In 1187, as the harsh winds of Hattin blew, Saladin emerged as the unshakable leader of the Islamic world, rising to the occasion. For the Crusaders, it was a devastating defeat, while for Muslims, it would go down in history as a victory written in gold letters. The Battle of Hattin. The Crusader army, fully backed by the Kingdom of Jerusalem, stood against Saladin. On that hot summer day, at the foot of the Hattin Hills, famous leaders like Guy de Lusignan and Raymond of Tripoli set out, bringing all their hopes with them. However, Saladin had prepared for this battle not only with swords but also with intellect and patience. The Crusaders, moving away from water sources, found themselves at the mercy of thirst in the desert. Saladin, with the wisdom he had gained over the years, planned to strike at this vulnerable moment. When the Crusaders faced Saladin's army, they realized the difference in size and strength between the two forces. The Muslims came together under Saladin's command with remarkable discipline, united in spirit. As the battles began at Hattin, Saladin managed his army like a conductor leading an orchestra, calculating each move in advance. While the Crusaders were exhausted from thirst, Saladin attacked them without mercy. In the end, a large part of the Crusader army was annihilated, and the defense of Jerusalem was weakened. This was a devastating defeat for the Crusaders. Meanwhile, Saladin had cleared the path to Jerusalem. This victory at Hattin was the awaited signal for the return of Jerusalem to Muslim hands. Immediately after the battle, Saladin began his march toward Jerusalem. Everyone knew that to Saladin, Jerusalem was not just an ordinary city, it was the heart of a faith, a sacred trust of Muslims. His goal was to liberate that holy land from oppression and occupation. As he advanced slowly and steadily toward Jerusalem, his footsteps were filled not only with those of a commander, but also with those of a leader and a savior. In September 1187, Saladin appeared before the walls of Jerusalem. The Crusader defenses in the city had lost their strength following the major defeat at Hattin. The people of Jerusalem, living in a city shaken by years of war, were eagerly awaiting Saladin's justice in the shadows of blood and suffering. Saladin was a leader who approached even his enemies with mercy, and he wanted this conquest to be not just a victory but also a message. Though the Crusaders continued to resist, Saladin's determined siege forced them to surrender. On a cool October morning, the gates of Jerusalem opened to Saladin and his army. That day, Jerusalem once again fell into the compassionate hands of Islam. After Saladin's victory, he demonstrated a tolerant and peaceful attitude toward the Christian population in the city. Saladin allowed everyone to leave the city safely and took strict measures to ensure that no harm came to the unarmed civilians. Jerusalem was restored to the Muslim world as a city governed by his justice and mercy. This conquest was not only a military success, but also a symbol of Saladin's greatness as a leader. With the reconquest of Jerusalem, Saladin etched his name in history, not just as a commander but as a ruler who approached humanity with justice. Ah, my friends, we're witnessing a time when two legendary leaders are on the stage, the rebellious and fearless King Richard of the West, and the compassionate yet unwavering leader Saladin of the East. It's the year 1189, and the Holy Lands are once again in turmoil. After the Battle of Hattin, Saladin had captured Jerusalem, and the Muslims reclaimed this sacred city. However, this event stirred deep anger and sorrow in the Christian world. The Pope called upon the greatest rulers of Europe to embark on a new crusade to reclaim the Holy City. Thus began the Third Crusade. The most significant figure of this campaign was undoubtedly King Richard the Lionheart of England. Richard was a ruler known for his bravery and warrior spirit. He left his crown in Europe and came directly to the battlefield, swearing to win back Jerusalem for the Christian world. However, Richard's path wouldn't be easy. He faced Saladin, who had won the love of his people over the years and ruled justly and devoutly. Saladin had reclaimed Jerusalem for the Muslims and ensured the city was governed peacefully. Now he was determined to use all his strength to protect his faith and his people against this new Crusader army. One of the greatest clashes between Richard and Saladin was the Siege of Acre. Acre was strategically important, known as the gateway to the Holy Lands. When the Crusader armies attacked to take Acre, Saladin put all his power into defending the city. The siege lasted a full 2 years, nights and days blurred together along Acre's walls, and the earth was soaked with blood. The Crusader army grew stronger each day, but Saladin's soldiers held on with tremendous determination. Saladin constantly positioned himself at the front lines to motivate his troops, encouraging them. Eventually, however, the Crusader armies managed to breach Acre's defenses, and the city fell. This was a heavy blow for the Muslims, but Saladin did not lose faith. He knew that no matter how brave Richard was, he would ultimately have to come to a compromise. My friends, it was after the fall of Acre that historic encounters began between Richard and Saladin. The two leaders faced each other on the battlefield many times, but each time they showed profound respect for one another. Legend has it that when Saladin's army was in dire straits, Richard's army sent them water, and Saladin sent medicine to the ailing Richard as a gesture of goodwill. Even in such a war-torn environment, the respect they had for each other turned them into not just enemies, but also rivals and friends. In the end, both understood that Jerusalem couldn't be taken by bloodshed. After long negotiations between the two leaders, an agreement was reached that ended the Third Crusade. According to this agreement, Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed to visit the city. Although Richard couldn't capture the Holy City, he agreed to a dignified withdrawal. Saladin, on the other hand, elevated his reputation in the Muslim world by protecting Jerusalem and earned his place in history as a just leader by establishing peace. And so, my friends, this great clash in the Holy Lands came to an end, marked by the mutual respect and yearning for peace between Richard and Saladin. Ah, my friends, the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin had opened a wound in the Christian world. A wave of anger spread across Europe, from the Pope to kings, lords, and the common people, all unwilling to accept the loss of Jerusalem. The Third Crusade, launched to reclaim these lands, was perhaps the most hopeful campaign of all. However, the peace treaty made between Richard and Saladin, based on mutual respect, meant that the Christian armies would be kept away from Jerusalem for a while longer. Yet, my friends, this agreement didn't calm the waters. Rather, the Crusaders and Europe's gaze remained fixed on Jerusalem. Preparations for new campaigns began soon after. Another major expedition known as the Fourth Crusade was launched to reclaim Jerusalem. However, in a twist of fate, this time the Christian warriors turned their attention not to Jerusalem, but to another Christian city, Constantinople. Oh, it's even hard to describe. The Crusaders took advantage of the Byzantine internal strife and plundered Constantinople, causing great damage to this ancient city. On that day, my friends, witnessing how far the Crusaders had strayed from their original purpose was a shameful sight for humanity. Instead of capturing Jerusalem, they had seized Constantinople, waging war against their own kind. This incident was one of the clearest indicators of how complex the Crusades had become and how politics overshadowed sacred goals. However, Europe continued to organize new campaigns to distract from this great deviation. The Fifth Crusade was part of these efforts. After Saladin, the Muslim rulers took strict measures to protect these lands and implemented significant precautions to ensure Jerusalem wouldn't be lost again. In the Fifth Crusade, the Crusaders turned their focus to Egypt, as it was the strongest Muslim state guarding Jerusalem. Their plan was to capture Egypt and leave Jerusalem defenseless. But once again, the Crusaders didn't achieve the success they were hoping for. Heavy conflicts along the Nile and unexpected floods weakened their army. This campaign ended in failure against the strength and resistance of the Muslim world. Oh, my friends, but the Crusaders' obsession with Jerusalem never seemed to fade. With the Sixth Crusade, Europe united once more. However, the leader of this campaign, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, chose a different path from the others. Instead of reaching Jerusalem with sword and blood, he opted for diplomacy. He made agreements with the Islamic world to temporarily hand Jerusalem over to Christian control. For a brief time, Jerusalem was back in Christian hands. However, this victory couldn't last. The Muslims remained vigilant, always prepared to defend their holy lands. O Jerusalem, how many times has it been conquered? How many times has it changed hands? Even history struggles to keep count, my friends. The Crusaders' passion for Jerusalem was like an unquenchable fire. Each new campaign brought new hopes and dreams, yet each left behind blood, pain, and disappointment. And so it continued until, at long last, the Crusades came to an end and peace returned to Jerusalem. Ah, my dear friends, the glory of the Kingdom of Jerusalem had begun to rot from within over time. In a land once echoing with the victorious songs of the Crusaders, sadness and uncertainty now reigned. The Christian lords ruling in Jerusalem and the surrounding castles had grown weary from war and were struggling to maintain the kingdom's unity. Time was working against them. What was once the magnificent Kingdom of Jerusalem was slowly weakening under the complex politics of the region, influenced by the Muslim states and internal conflicts. This kingdom became increasingly isolated against the forces of the Muslim world and began to lose its power. While the Crusaders tried to hold on to Jerusalem, their efforts to protect their territories became increasingly difficult after Saladin's victory. Saladin's clever strategies and the unification of the Muslim world intensified the assaults on the Crusader castles. Each castle served as a stronghold in the Crusaders' defense line, but friends, as they fell one by one, the collapse of the Kingdom of Jerusalem became inevitable. Fear was almost embedded in the very stone walls of the castles. Ah, you should have seen those days. Once imposing castles like cracked des Chevaliers and Beat Nuba fell one after another. Each fallen castle further drained the morale of the Crusaders, as each one was a gateway to Jerusalem. Each siege diminished the Crusaders' grip on Jerusalem a little more. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, whose trust in one another had weakened and whose armies had scattered, was slowly doomed to disappear from the map. Meanwhile, the Muslims were burning with the determination to protect these lands. For them, Jerusalem was a symbol of their faith. Their unity and solidarity for Jerusalem had become an almost invincible force. And finally, my friends, when the last days of the Kingdom of Jerusalem arrived, history was about to turn a new page. The glory of Jerusalem had given way to the shadow of sorrow. The last stands in Jerusalem were broken one by one, forcing the Crusaders to abandon their lands. The dream of the Crusader Kingdoms was buried in the pages of history, and a new era began in these sacred lands. Thus, the Kingdom of Jerusalem withdrew from the stage of history, but my friends, its story continues to stand as a unique lesson etched in world history. Ah, my dear friends, with the end of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Crusades, it wasn't just the ruined castles and blood-soaked lands that remained. The cultures, beliefs, and strategies that would gradually develop in this region were also marked by the scars of this war. The brief but intense presence of the Crusaders in the Middle East deeply affected every community living in this geography, leaving behind invisible ties, shared knowledge, and a web of interaction among them. In fact, the Crusaders brought not only the shadow of their swords, but also habits, thoughts, and technologies from the Western world to these holy lands. Ah, imagine those days when the Crusaders stood in their towers, trying to understand this land through foreign eyes. When they first arrived, this territory was filled with mysteries for them. They didn't even know the local people's languages, customs, architecture, or the spice-rich cuisine. But over time, the Crusaders began to adapt to this unfamiliar world. They built sturdy castles using construction techniques brought from Europe. These structures were made in such a way that they still stand tall, symbolizing the warrior spirit of these lands even centuries later. Massive fortresses like Crac des Chevaliers were not only symbols of military power but also evidence of the difficult and sometimes complex relationships the Crusaders formed with the local population. The powerful ringing of church bells that once echoed in the heart of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was actually the sound of a bridge being built between the West and the East. But dear friends, their legacy wasn't just about stone buildings. When the Crusaders returned from these lands, they brought back innovations to Europe's military and medical knowledge. The medical information they encountered in the Middle East, including the works of Ibn Sina and other Muslim physicians, gave rise to new understandings of health and medicine in Europe. The knights learned not only how to wield swords but also how to bandage wounds and heal the sick. And this knowledge would be passed down through generations in Europe, seen as a part of the Crusaders' legacy. We can't forget to mention the religious influences either. As the Crusaders explored the Islamic world, they had the opportunity to closely observe the Muslims' rituals, patience, and the depth of their beliefs. This led to the shaping of the first perceptions of Muslims in the Western world. Despite their hostility, these people built a bridge of mutual admiration and respect while coexisting. Many Crusaders marveled at the discipline and inner peace of the Muslims' worship. This left a lasting impact on the Western world, even after the Crusades. The traces of that time echo in our ears like a resonance. The Crusades may have ended, but the legacy they left still resonates in these lands today. The castles built by the Crusaders, the stories told among the people, and the memories of those old days engraved in every stone stand as reminders that time cannot wear away. Thus, my friends, the Crusaders' legacy became immortal in these lands. Even though the wars have ended, these holy grounds still carry whispers of those ancient days. Ah, my dear friends, what a long journey it has been, right? This story stretches from the rise of the Crusader Kingdoms to the shifting of Jerusalem, to the rise of Saladin like a shining star uniting the entire Islamic world. We have witnessed together the fierce struggles that took place in these ancient lands for centuries and the marks they left on the hearts and minds of the people. We recalled one by one the heroism, betrayal, victories, and losses that remain in the dusty pages of war. These lands have a spirit, my friends. Who knows how many times they were conquered, how many times they changed hands, but one thing never changed: everyone who came left something behind. The Crusaders were no different. Their indescribable desire for the sanctity of Jerusalem set them on their path. The stories etched into this land, its stones, and its air may have faded over time, but even now it's still possible to find their traces under every stone, in every twist of the caravan routes. Today, as you listen to the events of the past, perhaps you've wondered for a moment, despite all the wars and losses, why did these people keep coming back? Because Jerusalem and the Holy Lands were symbols at that time, ideals that inspired people, pulling them out of their worlds into the unknown. And who knows, perhaps every Crusader sought that ideal within themselves, wanting to see their salvation in every stone and every castle. Now, my friends, as we come to the end of our story, remember this history is not just filled with wars, kings, and conquests. History is written with the hopes people carry in their hearts and the pains they endure for their loved ones. Every drop of sweat spilled on this land, every drop of blood, weaves this place not just with stones but with human stories. And so our ancient journey ends here. But dear friends, don't leave this story here. Carry what you've learned in your hearts, listen to the whispers of history, and always remember that you are a part of this grand narrative. One day, when you stand before a stone or an ancient ruin, perhaps you'll recall those travelers of old who passed through here. And at that moment, history will transform from just a story into a memory that lives within your soul. May your path be bright, and your hearts filled with these ancient tales, my dear friends. Until we meet again in the next story, on another page of history. Now farewell, and remember, every story is a door to the past. Here we will uncover many more tales beyond those doors.